Okay.
Let people in. It's 6:59 still, so I'll wait oh, there we go, right at 7. Here we go. Letting people in now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Rudman. I think this discussion is going to be very interesting because we're talking about Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, but not during their amazing period in the 1930s when they made 9 movie musicals together. We're talking about them 10 years later in 1949. And they reunited, as you guys know, you saw the movie, they reunited for the Barkleys of Broadway. So they are older. And what do you think about that? I think that's an interesting proposition. I know that Bridget Emerson, who is our resident dance expert, is going to have something to say. We can count on her. But I'm betting all of you will have opinions. And I'm hoping that you'll also have stuff to say about the 4 people who wrote this film, because they're all sort of in the pantheon. They are Betty Comden and Adolph Green, who wrote the screenplay, and Ira Gershwin, who wrote the lyrics, and Harry Warren wrote the music. And that's to say nothing of my favorite curmudgeon, Oscar Levant. Oh, good. It's Deborah's favorite curmudgeon, too. And he plays a featured role. So I want us to have a field day. And now that you know how to participate in the chat or on camera, let's bring on my co-host. And that would be me. Hello, everybody. Glad to see you. I'm happy that we have really anybody, because Leandra reminded me that we have not been together for 6 weeks. We wanted to be sensitive to Passover, and there was just another sort of calendar thing, but we have not been together for 6 weeks. And as I said to Leandra, I feel rusty tonight. So I hope I can come out of my rustiness, and I hope that we have a few more people, and I see we do. Good. And we have the famous mother-daughter combo of the Kents and Deborah Matthews. This is good. This is very good. So, you know, I said in my intro that I really wanted to talk about the writing in this movie, because I think it's very, very smart and just perfect for what Comden and Green were dealing with. But I know you guys want to talk about what it's like seeing Fred and Ginger 10 years later. So we will start there. So, you know, how do we feel about performers who are aging? And Ginger was 38 when the movie was made. Fred was 50 when the movie was made. And I kind of want to toss out the question, you know, I'd love to hear some examples from you guys about performers who aged well in movies and performers who did not age so well in movies, and why or why not, and blah, 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 blah. So let's start there if we can. Some examples of aging well or not aging well. Before we even get to Fred and Ginger, let's talk about others.
Cary Grant
Leandra,
aged well.
you're calling on people with hands, and who?
Oh.
Eileen was, yeah, she was jumping in there. That's
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's
Oh.
okay.
Someone
And
who
you-
aged incredibly well, Cary Grant.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great place to start. Anything about him that comes to mind that sort of told you that he aged well? About, in terms of
His popularity, the films that he kept making. He didn't retire until I think 1960 or 61 after Walk, Don't Run. And I think that was one of the first times that he wasn't the leading male in his movie. But other than that, I mean, he just had some heck of a career. I mean,
he did. He really did. I wonder if there's anything about his performance that struck you as he got older. Did he seem older to you? And if so, in what ways?
actually, no, I don't think he ever lost that touch. I mean, he was debonair.
Yeah.
The comedy, the sophisticated comedy,
Yeah.
working with Hitchcock. I mean, he
Yeah.
made North by Northwest, what is like 1958,
Yeah.
and he was still the leading male.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example, Eileen. Thank you. And Leandra has just reminded me that I am rusty because I didn't do the poll. We've got to do the poll about the Barkleys of Broadway. So here comes the visual, and Leandra will lead us through it.
Absolutely. So yeah, question 1, have you seen this film before? And question 2, did you enjoy the movie? We are at 31% participation, 43%, 50%, 68%, 75, 81%. Okay, 13 out of 16 people have participated. I will close it in a few seconds. All right, I'm going to close it now. And share the results. All right, so it looks like 50% had seen the film before and 50% had not.
Good.
And then, yeah, and then let's see. Did you enjoy the movie? 43% said yes, they loved it. 7% said no, it wasn't for me, and then 50% said it was okay.
Okay, so we've got 93% who had a good time in one way or another. That's good. That's good. And I see we have 17 people participating, which is wonderful. Since we haven't been together for 6 weeks, that's great. Other examples before we get to Fred and Ginger of performers who either did or did not age gracefully in movies.
I'll go to Arthur and then Laurel.
Well, there's Spencer Tracy, who had a mixed record. He did, as he was aging. He did Judgment at Nuremberg, in which he was superb. It was a Spencer Tracy role where he could underplay and just, just not act. He was famous for saying, "Don't act, just be." And then he was in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, a bad movie, and he was terrible in it. He tried to overact. And the same thing, I think, with the one with Elizabeth Taylor. He did not do that kind of, with the about Father of the Bride and, and the remake. Later on, he strayed, and from his core abilities. and he also showed his age through his alcoholism. Same thing with John Barrymore. John Barrymore at the end could barely stand up. Couldn't remember even a line with a cue card in front of him, couldn't say it, and he did not age well.
I think this is a good question. Who else has opinions? So I think, Arthur, if I may paraphrase you, just because it's so quotable, it's a mad world was a bad movie.
Yes. and when Spencer Tracy tried to overact, he was awful.
Uh-huh. Okay, who else has a
Okay.
take?
Yeah, Laurel and then Sandra.
Thank you. Leandra has reminded me that I'm sort of a steamroller in not letting people get into the discussion. I just keep going. So she's going to try to break me of that habit tonight. So who have you got?
Laurel and then Sandra.
Okay.
Angela Lansbury.
Oh. Say more about that.
I can't think of a role that I have seen her do in any of the last 10 years of her life that wasn't just perfect. I mean, it felt so right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I saw her do the revival of Little Night Music, which was within the last 10 years, and she was perfect. Yeah. So who do we have, Leandra?
Yeah, Sandra.
Okay, I have two examples. One is Mickey Rooney. So he starts out as this real adorable, cute kid, in the 30s, but then there was a huge physical decline when he's, very overweight as an older actor. But I recently saw The Black Stallion, which he is in, and as an older, it's a very good acting performance. And I guess he toured with Ann Miller in musicals when he was older. So I think you'd have to say, even though there was a physical decline, he still aged well. And my other example is Barbara Stanwyck. I think she's extremely underrated. She had a fabulous career. She such a varied career. She kind of segued into Westerns when she was older, and she did comedy, she did melodramas, she did everything. So I think that that's someone who had a really, really enduring career that I think any actress would want to emulate. These weren't, well, I guess Mickey's a musical example, not so much Barbara, but she could sing and dance a little too. So those are my two examples.
These are all really good examples. I'll just toss in about Mickey Rooney. I never knew Mickey Rooney really, but I had the chance to interview him very late in his life. He was at Playhouse Square in Cleveland. I can't remember what he was doing, but I will tell you this about Mickey Rooney. He was an obnoxious interviewee. I mean, maybe it's one reason that he kept going so successfully. He just would not listen to any question. All he did was talk about himself, blah, 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 blah. So I didn't become a huge Mickey Rooney fan when he was really old, but I will say that, man, he never lost that essential energy of being a performer at the top of his game. He was really great that way.
Right, and then Mr. Meyer, Sue
Yeah.
Meyer's screen. Yeah.
Well, Sean Connery
Oh,
started
one.
out young and suave and ended up old and suave. It was great. After the James Bond experiment, he did some other things that were just terrific. Another actor who aged well, I thought, was James Cagney. Did some terrific, not a whole lot, but he was, as he aged, he was great, continued to be great. I guess being a song and dance man stays with you. And, it was a good thing for him.
Uh-huh.
There are probably others, but those are two that come to
Yeah,
mind.
no, those are two really good examples. This is a very fertile question. Leandra, have you got anybody? Or,
Yes. I don't see any hands now. Raise your hand if you have anything.
well, then I should call on Bridget before we even get to Fred and Ginger dancing, because I know she'll have an opinion on this
Yeah.
aging thing.
I have lots of opinions. I'm sure that's a terrible shock to all of you. I've actually been thinking about this quite a lot recently about aging and being an artist. And I'm stepping away from the need to judge people for aging and evaluating them based on whether or not I think they're aging well or aging poorly. I think everybody's body is unique. Everyone's craft is unique. Everyone's gift and approach is unique. And I'm not feeling the need to pass judgment on that right now.
Okay, well, speaking as an older person, I'm glad you're not judging me.
I'm not judging you, and I'm also trying to not judge myself.
Fair enough. That's a good
Arthur?
deal.
Go for it, Arthur.
No, John Raitt,
Uh-huh.
who had the good sense to step aside after a joyful noise for very good reasons. And then he just took a backseat to Bonnie. So in a sense, he aged well. I take issue with Bridget. You judge something because you care about it. And I think that we are all judged all the time. Judgments are made, friends are made, enemies are made, things are done on the application of good judgment. And I expect to be judged in context or out of it for my whole life. I want to be judged, and I know that I am.
Wow. I think that Eileen, who spoke earlier, but has put a couple things in the chat, I think that she intersects very well with what you just said, Arthur. For one thing, she wants to add Barbara Streisand, Cher, and Julie Andrews to the list of those performers who have aged very well, really good. But she also said, as someone out there to find a new job at age 60, the ageism out there is horrible. And so whether you agree with Arthur or not that, you know, you would want to be judged as you age, I think it's an interesting point. And I must say personally that I feel ageism a lot at the age of 72. And Arthur, if I'm really being honest, I would prefer not to be judged. But I get it. Oh, hello, Herb Drower. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I was going to interpose one thing. I think one of the guys who I admire most was Fred Astaire. You watch him in his early career till the very end, he always entertained. And Fred Astaire, he wasn't the greatest actor in the world, but he could entertain. And his popularity over how many decades did he upward? He was in the 20s, wasn't he, when he started with his
on Broadway?
yeah.
He started in the 20s, and he
yeah,
went,
with his sister,
last
yeah.
film was in the late 60s.
And when this movie was what, 49?
Yep.
And he was still at the top of his game. And he always entertained me. Every time I watch Fred Astaire, I smile when I see him dance. He didn't do much else, I admit that. He wasn't the greatest actor in the world. But what an entertainer.
Yeah. For sure. And Eileen just keeps adding to the chat. She also wants to add Judith Light to the list of those who have aged well. You've come up with a lot, Eileen. Thank you. Well, Bridget, can I put you on the spot? Can we segue into Fred and Ginger in this movie, and I know you don't want to be judging, but as someone who really does know dance, and maybe it's not even a question of whether they dance well in this movie, quote unquote, but could you just describe sort of how they are dancing differently in 1949 as opposed to the 1930s from your technical point of view?
I'm not sure how technical it will be, but what I observed is that, first of all, I really wish they weren't rolling the opening credits during that first number, because
Me too.
right? It was so distracting. I really wanted to see what they were doing, because the little bit of the facial expressions that I could see, it seemed like they were really enjoying, being together and enjoying dancing together again. So I was perceiving genuine delight on her face, for example. Whether that was manufactured or actually genuine, I don't know. But there were a couple other moments where I perceived the same delight on her face. I really enjoyed seeing them working together again. I enjoyed this reunion of them coming together again. Was it the magical precision that maybe they had 10 years before? Does it really matter? No, this is a different time. It's a different dynamic. It's a very different movie. The pieces, the dances themselves were pretty different. Only the very last one seemed to be bringing back some of the really traditional things that they had done before. There were a couple elements here and there, but this was a very different endeavor. And I really enjoyed seeing them back together again.
Me too. Me too. But boy, you and I had the same response to the fact that the credits are rolling over. I mean, I think that's crazy. I've never directed a film in my life, but I think that was a terrible decision to do that. I mean, here, we haven't seen the two of them in 10 years. And the first glimpse, when we are so hungry to see them dance, is obscured by those damn credits. And Eileen, who just has so much to add tonight, tells me, and I forgot this, you can see the first dance without credits in either That's Entertainment Part 2 or Part 3. It's really awesome. So if you're like Bridget and me and you were frustrated as heck by the way that was done, check out That's Entertainment 2, or she really thinks it's 3. Probably 3. I think it's Part 3. Good thought. Ellen, I think you have something on your mind. I can tell. No? Oh, you're muted. No, you're still muted. Oh, you can't. Well, you must be able to hear us, but we can't hear you from your iPad. Oh, well, that's our loss. Okay, anybody want to tailgate on Bridget as we continue just sort of an exchange about, what did you notice that's different about Fred and Ginger 10 years later?
Okay, I see 3 hands: Deborah, Laurel, Arthur.
I wasn't going to respond to that particular point, but I did want to say that with Judy Garland as his partner, it would have been less plausible, the old bickering married couple. I thought that they were perfect for that. You felt that they knew each other that well. And so I just thought that that was a perfect dynamic that they couldn't have done when they were younger. And I saw no flaw. I'm not the technical expert, but I saw no flaw with the dancing. I loved it.
Go for it, Laurel.
Okay, I thought their footwork was wonderful. It stayed together all the time, or at least it looked to me as if it was all the time. the arm movement bothered me. His were far more. I said to Don, I really enjoy watching him much more than I enjoy watching Ginger. It just bothered me that hers were almost lower key. There wasn't as much energy in it. He's 50, she's 30, but damn, he was better to me.
Cool.
Arthur?
I agree with Laurel. He seemed to want to dance, and he continued for years after. In dancing, she didn't seem to care that much. She seemed much less interested. The high point of the movie was the last 30 seconds to a minute of They Can't Take That Away From Me, when she was flying around and he was flying around, and then she had energy. Even the Hermes Pan choreography of the flying shoes, there you saw that, or I saw that Fred Astaire still wanted to dance, still wanted to try things. But even that was derivative. The shooting, he'd done that before. You know, that on it. And dancing with an inanimate object, I guess that Dancing with the Hat Rack, the hat rack came later. Is that true? Or
Yes, it came
Yes.
later, 3 years
Oh.
later.
okay, so, but you know, that was okay. Apparently, MGM wanted Hermes Pan back.
Mhm.
He choreographed the flying shoes with Fred Astaire, very excited about it. But Judy Garland wanted Charles Walters, didn't want him. So they brought Walters in, and then when Judy Garland was fired from the movie, they wanted Hermes Pan back, but he had already committed to another show,
Mhm.
another movie.
I don't mean to interrupt, Leandra, if you saw another hand, but I just want to interject that something you just said, Arthur, really struck me, because you used the word wanted. That's a big word here, I think, because you noticed a difference between the two of them in terms of Fred. You saw wanting to dance more than Ginger registered for you. That's a big deal, because that's really an acting value as much as anything else. When a performer really wants something badly, and shows it or doesn't. So that's a big point. And would anybody like to respond to what Arthur said in terms of what you sensed about the two of them wanting to do those dances? Do you agree with Arthur that you thought that Fred registered that more strongly than Ginger did, or not?
What do you think, Bill?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And I'm not going to quote Arlene Croce. I quoted her in the intro. And Bridget, I really wanted to know what you thought of that quote, because she was very hard on the movie, and particularly on Ginger. You want to talk judgmental? There's Arlene Croce, who wrote the book on Astaire and Rogers, saying that at this point in her life, Ginger seemed more like she had the body of an athlete more than the body of a dancer. And that seemed pretty harsh to me. And I wondered if any of you agreed or disagreed.
We have a couple hands, Bill, from I think previous questions as well. So you mind if I I know it's kind of like overlapping a little bit, so I can maybe call on them and see.
Great.
Okay, awesome. All right, Mr. Meyer and then Ellen. You're muted, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer, you're muted. Can you hear me?
As far as the idea of her having the body of an athlete, so what? Dancers are athletes. Athletes can be dancers. She was in good shape, I thought, and sure had the moves. Whether she wanted to do it or not, I thought she was just fine. And the idea of Fred wanting to dance more, the role I think called for her not to want to dance more. So that might have had something to do with it. So
Good
okay.
point. That's a good
So-
point.
Oh, well, my point was a little bit ago when you were talking about the art, somebody was talking about, Deborah was talking about the bickering. I thought what's better about them in this movie than 10 years ago or the previous movies was they were really better at arguing. The arguing was much more realistic. To me, it made more sense. The other bickering was a kind of silly plot thing. There had to be some kind of conflict in order for there to be a
Yeah.
plot. So that something had to be resolved. But this was, this was what the whole movie was about, that she was being taken for granted as far as she could see. And she needed to prove something to herself, and she did prove it. And I thought their faces in those arguments were so real. I thought they were really good at arguing in this film.
We could all take a lesson from them.
Yeah, that's right. We really could.
Alrighty.
4 more hands, right, Leandra?
Yes, we have 4 hands right now. So Ellen and then Bridget.
I finally figured out how to do that. Yes, it was hard to separate whether the facial things and body language going on, say in the Highland Fling, which wasn't exactly a favorite of mine, and I couldn't figure out if art was imitating life or the other way around or what. But it didn't seem like a particularly wonderful number to me, although I thought the choreography was kind of fun. But yes, she was trying to get out into straight movies without the musical element. And the next year she wins for Kitty? No.
Yeah, Kitty Foyle.
Foy? Yeah. Well, yeah, so she got her wish, which was interesting, but I don't know if she was trying to usher her way out necessarily. I think that's just what the this plot called for. But by the way, I loved that rehearsal number. I thought that was great. It was mostly side by side type work. It wasn't a lot of spinning around and moving upstage, downstage, and all that stuff. It was just really focused as a rehearsal piece. And I just really liked that choreography. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
And okay, that's about all I wanted to say for now.
That's great. No, that's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Good stuff.
All right, Bridget.
So first, going back to your question about the quote, that quote set my teeth on edge before I even saw the film. And the reason why it did so is because there's been so much talk over several years recently about sizeism and ageism on Broadway and Hollywood, on body shaming and all these things. And so already I was pretty annoyed with that critic before the film even started. I agree with Howard. Dancers are athletes. I thought she looked beautiful. She looked like a person who was her age and in excellent shape for her age, and her body was in excellent condition for her age and her profession. I saw absolutely nothing wrong with her body at all. I do hearken back to that comment about the arms as far as her positioning when she was dancing. There was a moment here and there where it wasn't maybe as sparkling as it was, 10 years prior. So I did notice that, but that's a different issue. And I also did not really care for the Highland Fling number. I felt it was terrible, to be honest. I felt the performance was flat from both of them, the choreography was dull. I did not care for the number at all. When we have time, I would love for you to ask me about that number in the shoe shop and what that harkens to as far as classical music.
Well, let's make a segue to that right now, because actually, Arthur, I think you were a little hard on that number, saying that, you know, Fred Astaire had done the deal with the guns. The guns, that's only part of that number. I mean, I think anyway that number is so darn imaginative in the way those shoes are brought to life. And I think, and Bridget, I don't know anything about dance, as you know, but I think that one of Astaire's really cool things in that number, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that he makes it appear that those two shoes on his feet are actually doing the work, that he's not doing the work, that it's coming from, if you will, the inner life of those shoes on his feet. And I think that is extremely cool.
May I respond to that? I do have my hand up, I promise. So absolutely, that's the first thing that I noticed about that number, was how artfully that particular aspect was done, that he was physically very conscious of moving his body in such a way as to communicate that very clearly. And it did appear to my eye to be very authentic. He clearly worked very hard on that, to isolate the movements in the lower part of his body so that it did look like the movement originated from the shoes and not from his body or his core. So I thought that was excellent. I wonder if anybody else caught the reference. Oh, first, I do have to say, as an aside, the point work on the faux point shoes, whoever was dancing those, it was terrible. But the rest of it was kind of fun. I wonder if anybody else caught the classical music reference that was happening not only dramatically, but actually musically in that number. Yes, I heard it. Go, Alan.
Sorcerer's Apprentice.
That is it. Did anybody else catch that?
Not until I read it at page 154 of the of Hermes Pan by John Francis China, and that was the inspiration.
That is correct. So we hear it musically. It's especially obvious. I think there's a moment when he goes to like close the door or something, and there is a moment where there's da 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 da. That is an exact quote from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And then there's a moment dramatically that harkens back to Fantasia, where he gets his broom and he's swatting at the shoes, and they're all in a circle around him. Like, that's an absolute visual reference to Fantasia.
That's really smart stuff, Bridget. Thank you.
All right.
Ellen too.
Oh yeah,
I wrote that
Ellen
down.
too.
I didn't.
Yes.
I think I noticed the first time I watched it, and then I needed to relook at it tonight. And I went, "Oh my gosh, yeah, there's that exactly what you said, Bridget, with that musical la da 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 da." This is the guy's leaving with his boater hat, and then all the stuff. Yeah, it was just like all the brooms picking up the pieces, and that tempo picking up with the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that was cool.
Good
Thanks.
work, you guys. Good work.
Awesome. All right, and we can move over to Arthur.
Something that we've discussed before, which is when the dancers, and Fred and Ginger had this in their earlier films, are in conflict, and they work out the conflict through the dance. And Ginger was just as strong as Fred in those dances. She took her position, maintained it, and fought through with him. There was conflict and resolution or not. The problem here is there was no conflict. It was going through the dances well enough. He was engaged, She was not. So that essential element of what made them so exciting was missing in the dance.
Isn't that ironic, Arthur, that, and we're going to get to the screenplay a little later. Don't you think it's ironic? Because I find, you know, what you find missing, I find in the performance of the screenplay, actually. I think she acts the part very well in terms of the dialogue and the rest of the film, very well, and that they're exceedingly well matched there. But I think it's ironic that we don't see as much sort of, if you will, subtext in the dances as we do in the rest of the film. I think that's ironic.
I agree.
Laurel? You're muted.
I'd like to harken back to the question of the degree that they wanted to do this.
Yes.
Because she never danced. Well, okay, I won't say that. She did not have any major dancing roles that I was aware of, which could leave a whole lot of space. But she Fred Astaire went on for a long time.
Yeah,
He continued dancing a long time.
that's right, until the late 60s.
Yeah.
I see a hand from, I think it's Eric, maybe, or yeah.
Ed?
Ed. Okay.
I just want to say I thought Ginger was at the top of her game in this movie. She was gorgeous. She was smiling. She looked great. She acted great. She was all there. I just thought she was splendid. Fred Astaire was great as always, but he was Fred Astaire, but she was just at the top, had her absolute peak. She was great.
Hear, hear. Terrific to hear that.
All right. And I see Bruce and then Sandra.
Oh, good. We haven't heard from Bruce all evening.
Well, we got here late, sorry. Judy has supposed that because the conflict between the two of them was that she no longer wanted to dance, that her dancing was actually what she didn't want to do. And so she may have stepped down in her dancing from what we've seen previously between the two of them in order to show that she didn't want to dance any longer. She wanted to do straight roles.
Very reasonable.
I thought you did. All right, Judy also has something else, just a moment.
When she was, she talked about being Romeo and Juliet in high school, and she would have learned then that she should be in character. And she did the tryout for the movie that she stage play. She acted like she didn't know how to get in character until he told her how to do it over the phone. But she would play the person he saw in these times, and she was incompetent without him.
You understand?
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody want to tailgate on that? That's an interesting issue. Personally, I find her director in this film completely obnoxious. So that, you know, I mean, I don't know where that leaves Ginger's character. If I were Ginger's character, I would be insecure working with such a jerk. But that's where I'm coming from.
All right. I see a hand from Sandra and then Bridget.
All right, I guess I was going to make comments earlier about this compared to the earlier movies, but a lot of what I was going to say has been said already, but I'll kind of summarize it quickly. This is, I think, the third time I've seen the movie. The first time, hated it. I thought it was not as good as any of their black and white movies. I missed the Art Deco look from the earlier movie.
Yeah.
I didn't think they had the same romantic relationship with each other as dancers as in the earlier movies, especially when Fred literally seduces her through the dance in the early movies. So it had this romantic quality. So didn't like it at all and really thought that Scottish number was obnoxious. So
Yeah.
then I didn't revisit it for many years. I did see it, I think, early in the pandemic. I watched it again. It came up on Turner Classic Movies. And this time I thought, this isn't so bad. I was just taking it on its own without comparing it this time. And I thought, oh, this isn't as bad as I remembered it being. It's actually pretty entertaining. So the second time I liked it. This time I was watching it with your comments in mind and kind of appreciating little bits and pieces of it and the screenplay. And I did like that it parallels their real life situation. And I think in the earlier movies, I heard someone comment that they didn't like so much the earlier movies because Fred is always wooing her and she's giving him a hard time. She's being mean to Fred, and Fred is so adorable. She's so mean to him. But at least in this one, although it annoyed me that Ginger was kind of treated as a little bit stupid at times in the screenplay, and he has to teach her how to act. I didn't like that, but they are bickering with each other, and it's not him wooing her and her being mean to him. They're bickering like a married couple, and I do think that is pretty good. And actually, this time I thought he does kind of seduce her through the dance, and that dance they do at the benefit, there's a little bit of that, a little bit of the romantic, he's wooing her through the dance in that particular number. So I thought, okay, maybe it's coming together for me. I don't like it as well as the earlier films, but it does have its merits, and I can see what you mean about the screenplay because there is some good stuff in it here and there.
Good, thank you. And that's a good segue to the screenplay. I would just love to talk about the screenplay for a few minutes anyway. And in the intro, I spent a lot of time praising Comden and Green, who, in a way never became household words unless you were really into Broadway musicals or Hollywood musicals. But I think this is an absolutely first-rate screenplay. And Judy Garland left this film very early on. These parts and the whole notion of the bickering couple, I mean, I think Comden and Green win great applause from us on the way it was crafted. I can't find any fault with it. I think the relationship is very, very well crafted by the two of them. Anybody want to comment on just what you noticed about the writing and therefore the way the writing was acted by the two of them?
Well, I don't see any hands about that, but I know Bridget had a hand up, so I'm sure she'll have something to add to that maybe as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I can segue. So I wanted to comment on the prior question. Look, like directorially, this is no swing time, y'all. Like, is there anything as magical and as beautifully crafted as that, as far as one of their other pieces? In my opinion, no, there's not. Everything about that film is so, it's so well balanced. It's so calculatedly drawn out. There's just no comparison. So I did not come into this film expecting that. I do think the screenplay and the reality of the fighting that they had was believable. And another thing, like when Bill, you mentioned something earlier about art imitating life, I actually was cringing when he was saying that stuff to her about Svengali and how he created her. And I was like, oh no, this is a little too close to reality here. Like, I have a feeling this is a fight they've had before. So that made me a little bit uncomfortable because I felt it was very real. And I felt their fights were very real.
They are.
And yeah, they really are. There's a lot of angst that they're working out in this film.
There is.
It's clear that that's happening on the screen. And I put a couple comments in the chat about her acting. she has really come a long way, in my
has.
opinion, as a performer, especially, I mean, so many times I see it during their dancing, not just in the dramatic moments, but during their dancing, her face is just, it's like a sunset. You can watch every little nuance unfolding, and she's a much more nuanced actress in this film, and especially in that routine where they're dancing at the benefit. You can see that the camera is zoomed in much more closely on her face than it used to be when they were dancing as a couple in several of the other films, where the camera was pulled back out a little bit more. And you can see all of the emotions, the complex emotions flashing across her face during that scene. So I did just want to call out that I do feel it was very realistic in several ways. Did I love everything about the film and the writing? No, but I really did appreciate those elements of it.
So I'm sorry, Arthur, just before you jump in, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but I think with Comden and Green, and they're heroes of mine, I think this was a very, very original approach to a movie musical, to tell this particular story, particularly because all of us had such long relationships with Fred and Ginger, in which, as a couple, they were different. To give us a Fred and Ginger in a different sort of way, I just think we can't praise Comden and Green enough for that. You know, I mean, there's funny, amusing stuff, but what I'm praising is the whole concept of giving us these two characters at this point in their lives and letting that play out. I think it was a gutsy thing to do in a movie musical in 1949. I think it was gutsy.
Go for it, Arthur.
Compared with their later work, Bandwagon was theirs, correct? Bill?
Bandwagon is not Ginger.
No. I mean, was Comden and Green.
Yes, that's right.
All right. That I think was a far richer, somewhat darker treatment of the backstage that did not depend on prior knowledge of the principals. You didn't have to go outside the frame of the movie. I thought that was richer. Do Re Mi was theirs, wasn't it?
No. Carson
Cannon. Okay. Do Re Mi in.
I mean, it has lyrics by Comden and Green, but the script is by Carson Cannon.
Okay. And Singing in the Rain. They were for Comden and Green that and the Bandwagon I thought were richer explorations of the backstage situation. I thought this was somewhat sketchy. It required too much of assumptions about Astaire and Rogers outside the movie to bring in to enrich it. And I wasn't all that pleased with the two piano interludes. I thought that was filler. And I wish that there was more to it. As a first go at this, fine. But I much prefer Bandwagon. I much prefer Singing in the Rain. I much prefer their later work. And I am big fans of Comden and Green. I thought this was sketchy.
Okay, I will just say I'm heavily biased toward Comden and Green, and they can do no wrong in my opinion. But this is very early Comden and Green. And as I pointed out in the intro, this was the first time they got credit for original screenplay by. This was a big deal for them, this movie. And I just think the idea is really, clever. It's more than clever, but you're right. The bandwagon and Singing in the Rain, they went deeper. They did. I buy that. But this is a movie that is often dismissed. So I'm glad that you guys, for the most part, did not dismiss it. But let's go back to what you said about Oscar Levant in a couple of ways. I agree. Those two piano pieces were sort of filler, although the first one, what was it, the Saber Dance, I think.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a pyrotechnics, and it only runs 3 minutes. That didn't bother me. The other one ran longer, but I'm sure that in Oscar Levant's contract, it said that he got to do 2 major piano pieces because he was Oscar Levant after all. And, he was a major protege of George Gershwin, and so he got his stage time. But let's talk about Oscar Levant as, if you will, a performer and an actor, because I think that's important here. And, Common and Green knew that they were dealing with somebody who had, I'm going to use the word persona. I think persona is very germane, and I looked it up today. A persona means the aspect of someone's character that is presented to or perceived by others. And Oscar Levant, I mean, what do you think about Oscar Levant? I say he is himself in all his movies. He's playing himself, and that the persona is the same thing as who Oscar Levant is. And that's what makes it so fun. And I see that Ellen agrees with me, even though we can't hear from her because of her iPad. And isn't that unusual? I mean, to actually get the persona translated to a screen performance. I think that's very unusual. Anybody want to comment on Oscar Levant? Do you like Oscar Levant? Do you not like Oscar Levant? I love Oscar Levant.
Bridget?
I love him overall. I was not fond of his playing in the Tchaikovsky and the orchestra either. They were out of tune. It was terrible. But the whole thing was awful. But I enjoy. I like him, and he does always play himself, but I do enjoy him.
Wouldn't it be fun to write for Oscar Levant, to write a screenplay with an Oscar Levant character? I think that would be great fun.
Mr. Meyer?
Thanks. I remember watching Oscar Levant on late night talk shows way back when. And he truly was Oscar Levant. He was, everything that we saw in the movies was him as he did those interviews. And he's just such a curmudgeon. He's so much fun to listen to. I think he added a lot to this movie, and probably to every other movie that he's been in. He's just a counterpoint to all the other activities that are going on. And I enjoy just watching him and listening to him. And, the business about his, piano numbers, he's quite a virtuoso. I thought he was very good. So didn't bother me at all.
Big difference, I think, between Oscar Levant's persona and Fred Astaire's persona. Herb Drower mentioned very early on that Fred Astaire is not much of an actor. I don't criticize Fred Astaire's acting at all. I think it's just fine. But if you read Fred Astaire's autobiography, you find that Fred Astaire is much more introverted than the characters he plays on screen. And so that's a big deal, because with Oscar Levant, what you see is what you get. And it's who he was. Whereas with Fred Astaire, those were characters. Whatever you think of the acting ability, quote unquote, those were characters. Oscar Levant, the persona is the man.
Arthur?
I hereby sentence all of you who like Oscar Levant to all of his movies back to back, along with interspersed movies with B. Lilly. I mean, it's okay in tiny little doses, but I like people on screen who can act. And of course, at when he was on Johnny Carson, it was cruel. I thought cruel. It was like the old, the Saturday morning Charlie, no, not Buster Brown, pluck your magic twanger, Froggy, when Froggy was cruel. To everyone, I don't know if any of you remember that, but yes, one person remembers it. But Johnny Carson, I mean, he was deteriorating, popping pills, chain smoking, barely coherent in Johnny Carson, and we watched him. That was sad, but it was part of what we watched even early on in this movie.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and he had some good one-liners that Comden Green supplied him with. I'd say about 2 or 3 that were just big hits, and he downplayed them. And it's like the when you hit on the drum. But apart from that, he's a man who is coming apart, self-loathing, alcoholic, addict, and that's no fun.
Then, Arthur, why do you think Arthur Freed at MGM wanted him so badly to be in so many film musicals? Because he had quite a career in musicals.
Yes, he did. And there's one coming up. Night and Day is coming up. So if you want to see Cole Porter romancing Alexis Smith, it's coming up on TCM and their Warner Brothers tribute. And he, of course, is in that. I think it's because people watch train wrecks, and he was a train wreck.
Oh, Arthur, I mean, you're really digging deeply if you find Oscar Levant to be a train wreck in this film.
Well, no, and maybe I'm reaching back from what I knew him to be when he was on Johnny Carson the later days.
I think you are.
But you still have that fidgety, that inability to keep his hand in control. There are hints of it. I think he was a novelty. He was a novelty act. He was the equivalent of a 20s and 30s novelty act in Vitaphone, who survived. And that was his appeal.
Okay, anybody want to take another point of view here and say and praise Oscar Levant? Because I'm still what I'm trying to get at is, and I get your point, Arthur, but I'm still trying to get at why Arthur Freed wanted him in all those movies because Americans really liked him in all those movies. Why did they really like him? It's more than 2 or 3 jokes per movie. There's something about that persona that that really hit people. And I'm just trying to get at, what was it about Oscar Levant that made him so popular, particularly in the early and mid 1950s? What was it? Why do I like him so much?
Looks like Bridget might have something to say about that, and Deborah.
I do. I think he's very accessible. Like, he's very fast thinking as a character, because again, he always plays himself, so all his characters are the same. He's extremely clever, he's very gifted, he's very flexible, not as a character. I mean, he's Johnny One Note as a character, but I mean, flexible as all of his characters can do a lot of things. You know, whatever his character is supposed to play in the film, he's very gifted at. He's a pianist, he's a this, he's a that. So he's very competent, the characters that he plays in many of his roles. And I think people relate to him because they want to be him. He's
Yeah.
the person at the party who's a good time.
Yeah. Yes. I think so.
Deborah?
Yeah, I think that his acerbic attitude is refreshing. I loved the outdoorsy
The rain sequence. The rain.
no, not the rain sequence, when they're walking from the train to the house, that song. That was my favorite part of the movie. But I think he is laughing at the whole, conceit of the romantic comedy. He's saying this is ridiculous. And while inside it, but I think that he allows the audience to laugh with him at that, at the ridiculousness of all of these romances that are so implausible. In general.
Yeah. I agree. Good. Let's hear it for Arthur. Ellen, you must be so frustrated that we can't hear you.
I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand again.
Ah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, I'll try. And boy, I'm agreeing with you, Deborah, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like he's so different from us, Oscar Levant is, because he's classical, he's creative, he's comic relief. He's an observer kind of to the whole thing, and he really doesn't give a about really what's going on, except if it affects him to some degree. He's just comic relief. And maybe we needed that with all of the bickering and everything going on.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think he's brilliant at sort of underplaying what he does. It's sort of like he's talking out of the side of his mouth, and because it's all sort of witty asides that get inserted and so different from the rest of the film. He really, it's very refreshing, I think.
Right, he gives balance.
He gives balance.
His warped balance. It's great.
Yeah. Well, Arthur, have we changed your opinion at all, or are you still kind of stuck in the Johnny Carson period?
Well, I put a note in the chat.
Oh, yes. Give me Dudley Moore as pianist and humorist any day. Okay. We see you're weighing in. That's good.
Oh no, I love strong opinions. I love yours, Bill, when you're willing to express it. You're very gentle. I love people's judgment, including judgments of what I say and that I'm wrong. I don't mind people saying.
Oh, no,
I'm wrong.
I know that.
I love it when people say I'm wrong, and I'm never at a loss for that kind of.
No, I think it's great. Here's the point. Oscar Levant, you're bound to have a strong opinion about Oscar Levant. And that's what I think is the coolest thing about him, is that he's not just sort of in the nebula. He is who he is.
Yeah, he survived where Robert Benchley did not.
That's right. That's a really great contrast. You're right. One thing before we move on to the diehards, I think because of my age, I get a great deal of pleasure out of the sense of period here. This really feels like a 1949 backstage world to me. And of course, I'm going to give Comden Green props for that. But I just wondered if any of you were struck by that as well. that this movie is very much rooted in its period. Anybody feel that way or not?
I have my hand up, so I'll just go. Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you said that, because I agree with it so much that when I was watching the film, I didn't even think about it. I felt so immersed in the time and place, and it felt so genuine to me that until you said those words, I didn't even realize that was the case.
Okay. I mean, I had a professor in college who taught pop culture when that was just becoming recognized as a legitimate academic field. And he would love this movie because it does give us a sense of America in 1949, even though the world is very particularly backstage. I think there's a great sense of sort of where we are as a culture in that time. I saw a hand up, but I don't know whose it was.
Yes, we have 3 hands up. Mr. Meyer, Arthur, and then Eileen. Lots of hands.
I thought, I like the period piece. I always like those kinds of things. One of the things that struck us when we were watching it was the enormity of their apartment. It just kept going and going and going. I can't imagine too many 1949 apartments of regular folks looking like that.
Well, of course, they're not regular folks, are they?
Well, okay. True enough. But still, I just thought that was sort of over the top, but I liked it. I take it for what it is. And it was, for me, it was a lot of fun. And, and I appreciated the clothing and the period aspect of the cars, the architecture, the interior design, all of that stuff just was fun. We don't see that anymore.
We do not. But, I think it's cooler if we think that this is not Comden and Green writing a period piece of something, 10 or 20 or 30 years before. This is Comden and Green writing something that they want to feel is of this moment. And that's one reason why the film really works for me. I get that. I get that feeling.
All right, Arthur, and then Eileen.
Well, Broadway mattered in a way it doesn't matter now.
You're right.
And serious plays mattered at a time when they have long ceased to matter, except for star turns by egocentric, incompetent actors from Hollywood who want to show that they can act on stage. And I was reminded, particularly, and now I'm reminded myself, Bill, when you talked about the backstage, the great backstage Svengali breakaway movie, which was 20th Century.
Mm-hmm.
That preceded by 15 years, I think, almost 15 years, this. And I thought that it was obviously based on the play. I thought that was magnificent. And if you haven't seen it, and I'm sure most of you have, with Carol Lombard and John Barrymore, you should. It is just like Front Page, same authors, is the quintessential newspaper movie. That's the quintessential backstage. And I thought that was done to a degree that had not been done, and when far better in the backstage aspect of it than Barkleys.
Fair enough. There were 2 other hands, right, Leandra?
Eileen?
Sure. Your question about the look and feel of 1949. I thought that the costumes and the hairstyles really worked for that period. And they looked fantastic, actually. The hairstyles, the skirts, the dresses, the outfits, the backstage dancing, everything seemed to fit. I know that a lot of people have talked about how a lot of times the costumes don't fit the time period they're set in. And I recall Pride and Prejudice with Greer Garson and how that was set in a particular time, but their clothes didn't match the time period they were in. But this definitely did, and they really did look great. I mean, it didn't distract from the story and from the music or anything else that you were watching, that everything seemed to fit.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. And there was one other hand, I think, Leandra.
I think that's
No?
it.
Okay, then, we're gonna, I know we're gonna move on, but just two things. We haven't talked at all about their dance on They Can't Take That Away From Me. And that really does deserve a footnote, because unlike all the other songs in the movie, which are by Harry Warren and Ira Gershwin, as you know, They Can't Take That Away From Me is a George and Ira Gershwin song. But the reason it's in here is that it appears in Astaire and Rogers' Shall We Dance from, I think, 1937. But if you know that film, it was thrown away. Hardly anything was made of it. And between 1937 and 1949, when this movie was made, it had become a real standard. Now, if I were Harry Warren, who wrote the rest of the music, I wouldn't be so crazy about the fact that George Gershwin's music appeared in this movie. But he was not an egotist about it, and he gave permission for it to happen. And it's a beautiful dance routine. And the song finally gets its due as a major American song, which it did not get when it was introduced by Astaire and Rogers. So that's important, I think. The other thing I just want to say is, before we get together again, you probably know that John Kander and Lin-Manuel Miranda have a new musical opening on Broadway based on the Kander and Ebb film, New York, New York. And it's so cool that this happened. And go find the article that was written in the New York Times last Sunday about John Kander, who is 96 years old. There has never been a composer for the American theater who was writing a new piece at the age of 96. Or for that matter, and I know the guy who wrote the article, and we agreed, there's never been any composer who wrote a new score for Broadway in his 80s. This is amazing. And check out YouTube, because there is a fantastic interview with, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. The late night host on TV. Who am I thinking of?
Kimmel, Fallon.
No, neither one. Oh, well.
Colbert.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Colbert. There's an interview that John Kander and Lin-Manuel Miranda do with Stephen Colbert. I think it was 10 days ago. You got to see this. You've got to see John Kander. Talk about somebody at the top of his game. At the age of 96, he is delightful in this interview. And Lin-Manuel Miranda just really lets the focus go to John Kander. So we all have to carry positive thoughts that when this musical opens on Broadway next week, it is a big success, because that would be so great for John. I brought John to Cleveland maybe 8 years ago for a concert we did on his work. And he is such a sweet, wonderful man. So read the New York Times piece and don't miss the Colbert interviews, okay? I think we've done it, except for the miscellany. So let's move to miscellany, if that's okay. And let me tell you what the next movie is. The next movie is The Harvey Girls.
Yeah.
It's another Arthur Freed production for MGM. It was made in 1946. And it stars Judy Garland, but it's notable for a number of reasons that I'll talk about in the intro, including the fact that it features Angela Lansbury. And she plays a character who is ostensibly a singer in it, but they dubbed Angela Lansbury. And she never forgave MGM for that, because as she said in countless interviews, she could have sung those numbers. And she was 22, I think, in 1946. But it's a wonderful acting performance from her in this movie. And it co-stars Judy Garland and John Hodiak. So you got to see it, okay? Anyway, we'll be together for that in 3 weeks because of the way the schedule changed. We get together again in 3 weeks on Thursday, May 4. So join us, okay? And then we have our monthly statement on fundraising. We don't have our wonderful Barbara to do this spiel. She's our development director. I will only say, and you've seen this many, many times, that Barbara and I believe in what is called relational fundraising. And that's, you guys are a textbook case in relational fundraising, because over a period of more than 2 years, we've gotten to know you. And a number of you have contributed, and we're very grateful for that. But if I may be so bold, you have contributed in part because we've developed this wonderful relationship over such a long period of time. And I think that's the best kind of fundraising, whether, no matter what gift you choose to contribute, there is no right or wrong amount. It's whatever is meaningful to you. But we love the fact that we really by now have relationships with you. Okay, and number 3 miscellany is lyric from a cut song by Harry Warren and Ira Gershwin. And I will preface it by saying this. Ira Gershwin used to say, you know how we all learn in school not to write cliches or speak cliches? Ira Gershwin always said that as a lyricist, he was hungry for cliches, because if you set a cliche to music, it gave the cliche a whole new lease on life. So, for example, you know, George and Ira Gershwin wrote a song called How Long Has This Been Going On? A total cliche title, but it works brilliantly as a song. And another example is, let's call the whole thing off. A verbal cliche set to music and came off brilliantly. So here's another example. This is a Harry Warren and Ira Gershwin song that was not used in the movie, but the cliche is, I'm not taking any chances, turned into a song called Taking No Chances on You. I love this lyric, and I'm only going to share one chorus with you, and you don't know it unless you have the complete lyrics of Ira Gershwin book. You don't know it because it never appeared in the movie, but just listen to the wonderful idea in how he turns a cliche into something really fresh. He says, if the calendar says 13 and it's Friday, and I see the blackest cat, I don't say boo. Spilling salt upon the table finds me relatively stable, but I'm taking no chances on you. When the breezes bring the sneezes of the springtime, should you give out with the tiniest kachoo? At a speed that's supersonic, I'll be rushing with a tonic, simply taking no chances on you. Through thick and thin, through cold and hot, I'm holding tight. Don't fear. So the lady featured in my dreams will not suddenly disappear. I have nonchalantly walked beneath a ladder. Should I break a mirror? I'm not in a stew. I'm not scared by any mobster. I'll eat ice cream after lobster, but I'm taking no chances with you. Don't you wish you could write like that? I do. Okay, well, guys, my goodness, we went an hour and 20 minutes just before we even get to the diehards. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you in 3 weeks. Good night. And you'll hear that announcement says that the taping is off and the diehards will remain. Bye-bye, you guys.
Bye, thank you.